Poor Charlie's Almanac is a collection of the speeches, ideas, and philosophy of Charles T. Munger, the longtime business partner of Warren Buffett and vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. Edited by Peter Kaufman and first published in 2005, the book is not a typical investing manual. It is closer to a manual for thinking clearly and living well. Munger spent his entire life studying how to make better decisions, and this book is the record of what he found. Charlie Munger was born in Omaha, Nebraska in 1924. As a teenager, he worked at the same grocery store once owned by Warren Buffett's grandfather. He served in World War II, then graduated from Harvard Law School without ever completing an undergraduate degree. He built a successful law firm and investment partnership before joining forces with Buffett to transform Berkshire Hathaway from a failing textile mill into one of the most valuable companies in the world. He died in November 2023 at the age of 99, having thought rigorously and read voraciously almost until the very end. The single most important idea in the entire book is what Munger called the latticework of mental models. His argument was that most educated people are dangerously narrow. An economist thinks only like an economist. A lawyer thinks only like a lawyer. An engineer thinks only like an engineer. Each has a hammer, and so every problem looks like a nail. Munger believed that the truly wise person draws from many different disciplines: mathematics, physics, biology, psychology, economics, history, engineering, and weaves those models together into a latticework of understanding. When you encounter any problem, you pull from all of these simultaneously, the way a great doctor draws on anatomy, chemistry, statistics, and patient history at once rather than consulting only one textbook. From mathematics, Munger considered compound interest the most powerful concept in the universe. A small advantage, sustained over a long period, becomes enormous. He applied this not just to money, but to knowledge and reputation as well. From mathematics, he also drew on basic probability theory, decision trees, and an understanding of permutations and combinations. Tools that help you think clearly about outcomes rather than guessing by feel. From physics and engineering, he took the idea of critical mass, the threshold below which nothing happens and above which everything changes. He also took the engineering discipline of building backup systems and always keeping a margin of safety. Every great structure is built to handle far more load than it will realistically face. Every great investor and every well-run life should be built the same way. From biology, he took the lessons of evolution and adaptation, that the organizations and individuals who survive are not always the strongest but the most adaptable. He also took the concept of ecological niches, which in business translates to the idea of a competitive moat. Just as certain species occupy niches where they face little competition, great businesses occupy positions in the economy where competitors cannot easily erode their profits. From economics, he took opportunity cost, the insight that the true cost of any decision is not the money spent, but the best alternative you gave up. This sounds simple, but almost nobody uses it properly. Every dollar invested in one place is a dollar not invested in the best available alternative, and ignoring that comparison produces poor decisions constantly. The section of the book that Munger considered his most original intellectual contribution was his lecture on the psychology of human misjudgment. He identified 25 tendencies, systematic, predictable ways that the human brain generates wrong answers, and spent years refining his understanding of each one. These are not random errors. They are built into us by evolution, and they fire reliably under the right conditions. The first and most important is the super response to incentives. People respond to incentives far more powerfully than most managers, parents, or policymakers realize. If you want to understand why a person or institution is doing something that seems irrational or counterproductive, find out what they are actually being rewarded for. The behavior will almost always make perfect sense once you know the incentive. Munger told the story of Federal Express, which could not get its night shift package sorting to run efficiently until it stopped paying workers by the hour and started paying them by the shift. The incentive changed, and the behavior changed overnight. The second tendency is what Munger called liking and loving, the powerful human instinct to favor people and things we are attached to, ignoring their faults and accommodating their wishes. Its mirror image is the disliking and hating tendency, which leads us to distort reality in the opposite direction, exaggerating the flaws of those we dislike and ignoring their virtues. Both tendencies warp judgment, and both are constantly exploited by salespeople, politicians, and con artists. Doubt avoidance is the tendency to reach a conclusion quickly and stick with it, because ambiguity creates discomfort. This was useful on the savannah. Hesitate over a predator and you die. But it is disastrous in modern decision-making, where the right answer is often to slow down, gather more information, and tolerate uncertainty for as long as necessary. Closely related is inconsistency avoidance, the resistance to changing one's mind once a belief or commitment has been formed. People will construct elaborate rationalizations to preserve an existing view rather than update it when presented with new evidence. Munger considered this the root of most really catastrophic long-term mistakes. Loss aversion, which Munger called the deprival superreaction tendency, causes people to experience losses as roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel pleasurable. This makes investors hold losing positions far too long because selling would mean admitting the loss is real, and sell winning positions far too early to lock in the pleasure of a gain before it can be taken away. The rational behavior is almost precisely the opposite of what the emotional brain wants to do. Social proof is the tendency to look at what everyone else is doing when uncertain about the right course of action. In many situations, this is perfectly sensible. If everyone is running away from a building, you should probably run too. But in financial markets, it is catastrophically dangerous because it creates bubbles. The crowd becomes loudest and most confident at exactly the moment prices have risen to their most dangerous levels, and the desperate selling at bottoms happens precisely when buying would be most rewarding. Availability misweighing causes people to estimate the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind rather than on actual frequency. Plane crashes are dramatic and widely reported, so people overestimate how dangerous air travel is. Car accidents happen quietly every day, so people underestimate how dangerous driving is. Vivid, recent, or emotionally charged events feel more probable than they are, while quiet, routine, statistically common events are systematically underweighted. The authority misinfluence tendency causes people to defer to figures of authority even when those figures are wrong. The famous Milgram experiments demonstrated that ordinary people would administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to strangers simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. In business, this manifests as boards that rubber-stamp charismatic CEOs and employees who follow obviously flawed directives rather than speak up. Munger's most original concept was what he called the Lollapalooza effect, the name he gave to situations where multiple psychological tendencies or environmental forces all push in the same direction at once. Single causes rarely produce extreme outcomes. It takes several forces compounding together to create a truly spectacular result, for good or ill. A religious cult works not because any single technique is powerful enough to override a person's judgment, but because authority, social proof, reciprocation, liking, and commitment and consistency all fire simultaneously, and the combined force overwhelms ordinary resistance. The same dynamic creates stock market manias, corporate frauds, and institutional collapses. Understanding the Lollapalooza effect means learning to recognize when multiple forces are aligned and acting accordingly, betting aggressively when they align in your favor, or fleeing quickly when they align against you. When it comes to investing specifically, Munger's approach was built on a small number of principles applied with great patience and discipline. The most fundamental was to think of a stock not as a piece of paper that bounces up and down on a screen, but as a fractional ownership stake in a real business. The question is always the same. Is this a good business? Will it remain a good business? And am I paying a sensible price for it? Everything else is noise. A good business, in Munger's definition, is one with a durable competitive moat, something that prevents competitors from eroding its profits over time. The clearest moats come from brand power. Coca-Cola can charge more for sugar water than any competitor because the brand creates genuine emotional loyalty that no amount of money can quickly replicate. From network effects, a payments network or stock exchange becomes more valuable as more people use it, creating a self-reinforcing advantage that grows over time from switching costs when it is expensive or painful to change suppliers. Customers stay even if a slightly cheaper alternative exists. And from structural cost advantages, companies that can produce goods or services at a lower cost than anyone else due to scale, location, or proprietary process maintain a permanent edge. Equally important was his concept of the circle of competence. Munger and Buffett invested only in businesses they genuinely understood, industries where they could evaluate competitive dynamics, management quality, and long-term economics with real confidence. What matters is not how large your circle of competence is, but how honestly you know where its boundaries are. saying, "I don't understand this business well enough to evaluate it, and passing on an investment is a sign of wisdom, not weakness." Munger kept a mental too-hard basket for any situation he could not clearly analyze, and he put a great many things there without regret. The world offers enough clear opportunities that there is no need to force the ambiguous ones. He also had little patience for excessive diversification. Spreading capital across dozens of mediocre ideas just to reduce the anxiety of concentration was, in his view, a recipe for mediocrity. If you genuinely know what you're doing, you should bet significantly on your best ideas. If you do not genuinely know what you're doing, you should buy an index fund. The worst strategy is the one most people actually follow. Owning many positions chosen with false confidence, neither concentrated enough to outperform nor diversified enough to be safe. Patience was central to everything. Munger and Buffett famously did almost nothing for long stretches, studying businesses for years before buying, then holding for decades. They understood that most of their returns came from a tiny number of truly great decisions, and that the most important job was to avoid destroying those returns with foolish activity in between. Munger called this "sit on your ass investing without apology." The world richly rewards those who can wait, but only those who have done the intellectual work in advance so they are ready to act decisively when the right moment arrives. On the subject of business and management, Munger believed that integrity was not just a moral virtue, but a practical one, the most important ingredient in long-term success. He told the story of a surgeon who stopped an operation midway through because the patient's condition had changed, and continuing no longer served the patient's best interest, even though stopping meant forgoing his fee. Munger said that surgeon would never lack for patience. The reputation for putting the client's interest first is worth more than any single transaction. He also believed deeply in the power of a well-designed institutional culture. Organizations behave the way they behave because of the incentive systems they have built, the people they have hired, and the habits they have established over years. Changing an institution's behavior requires changing those underlying structures, not simply issuing new directives. Berkshire Hathaway worked in part because Munger and Buffett deliberately created a culture that resisted what Buffett called the institutional imperative. The tendency of large organizations to mindlessly imitate whatever their peers are doing, to approve acquisitions just because competitors are making acquisitions, to adopt strategies just because consultants are recommending them to everyone. Because Berkshire answered to itself rather than to Wall Street's quarterly expectations, it could afford to think independently. Munger was also a committed reader and learner his entire life. He described himself as a book with legs. His children joked that he was a book with a man attached. He read history, biography, science, mathematics, and philosophy continuously, not as a professional obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. He believed that knowledge compounds exactly the way money does. Each piece of understanding connects to others, reinforces others, and makes future learning faster. The person who has read widely across many disciplines does not just know more things. They think in a qualitatively different way, because they can draw analogies and connections that specialists cannot see. His philosophy of life was inseparable from his philosophy of thinking. He believed the single most reliable path to a good life was to avoid the obvious sources of misery rather than to chase happiness directly. Avoid envy, which is the only sin with no upside. It makes you feel terrible without improving your situation in any way. Avoid resentment, which Munger compared to drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Avoid unreliability, because a reputation for trustworthiness opens every door and a reputation for dishonesty closes them permanently. Avoid the people and substances that distort judgment. Alcohol, drugs, and bad influences compound in the wrong direction just as surely as knowledge and good habits compound in the right one. He was a happy man, and he attributed that happiness to a few things. Meaningful work that he found genuinely interesting throughout his life, a strong family and marriage, friendships built on mutual intellectual respect, and a disposition to count his blessings rather than dwell on what he lacked. He said the secret was low expectations, not pessimism, but a refusal to feel entitled to good outcomes. Every good thing that happened was a gift rather than a right, and that made it possible to enjoy what life actually delivered rather than suffering over the gap between reality and what he felt he deserved. Poor Charlie's Almanac is, at its core, a book about thinking. Not about stock picking, though it contains invaluable wisdom on that subject. Not about management, though it is full of insights there as well. It is about the discipline of seeing the world clearly. resisting the brain's many tendencies to distort reality, drawing on the best ideas from every field of human knowledge, inverting problems to see what is normally hidden, and then acting with patience and conviction when the evidence is genuinely compelling. Munger demonstrated across nearly a century of life that this kind of thinking is learnable, that it compounds over time, and that it produces results. In investing, in business, in relationships, and in the quiet satisfaction of a life fully and honestly lived. In my whole life, I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time. None. Zero. Charlie Munger.